mounted what is your first specialized shows about tattoo, I think. It's about Japan. Does Japan have a long tradition of tattooing?
Not that long. The Japanese tradition sort of in the old days they had what they call like a punishment a type of tattoo. If you would get caught for stealing or whatever, they would like make the first line of a character on your forehead, and with a second offense they would do that again, and with the third offense it would give the sign dog right on the front of your face, so everybody knew what kind of a character you was. And like number 4, I mean, like it's 3 strikes out in Japan, you know, like then some big sharp samurai sword would solve the problem and remove the tattoo. But the whole tattoo, as we have it now, sort of started around pretty much around 200 years ago, when the whole shogun period ended, and a lot of the Japanese samurais became like unemployed, and they took up their employment to work as protection for brothels, for gambling houses and stuff like that, and they were very looked down upon by the whole society. You know, they were like the first Yakuza, they were like the gangsters. So they took a little bit of a hero role away out of a Japanese novel, out of a Chinese novel which was translated into Japanese around that time, and which was a very popular novel called the Suikoden, and which is a story about the 108 heroes. And a lot of these heroes were heavily tattooed in the Japanese novel. In the Chinese novel they just had a little sign, but because these novels were illustrated by Kuniyoshi and by Hokusai, and they just took it and just went away with it, you know, like they just tattooed them all up. They made all these peonies on them and like wind bars and like squirrels and like lightning, and so they just filled them to the max. And that is basically that influence they gave them on that tattoo, and that made it how it became. It's still, you could actually say that Kuniyoshi invented the style of Japanese tattooing.
Now, speaking of that, you have in your show a lot of woodcuts and woodblock cuts, which feature people with tattoos. Could you tell us a little about that?
The strange thing is, when I started to collect years ago, I run into an antique store, and I go, wow, and how do I get this thing? And they told me it was very, very rare, and it took me years to find other ones. You know, it was really, really complicated to find these things, until a friend of mine, Ferry Berthollet, who has his big Japanese erotic collection, went out and looked for me, and he just brought them in every day. I mean, I couldn't get the money ready for him, or he had another. So like they just came from everywhere, and then eventually we bought a lot at a New York convention, because somebody at a New York auction at Christie's with like another 20 of them. So like we ended up with 50 different of them, and right now I know I could get another 50 different, because they're there, and the Kuniyoshi ones are the real expensive ones, they're hard to get. But there's a lot of, like, as you can see, it's all like out of the Kabuki theater, where they actually replay the Suikoden stuff. And when you are in Japan and when you go to a theater store, you will find like very small T-shirts, including nipples, in a skin color, with the tattoos all printed up there. And they're made for the Kabuki theater.
Now, was it popular for the actors to actually get tattoos?
The actors wouldn't really get them, like except maybe a few famous ones. But right now, the theaters where they do it, they wear those T-shirts, and they're very small. They're in the like in Tokyo, it's in Asakusa. They have these very small Kabuki theaters, and it's also where the Yakuza movies play. Because the whole Japanese gangster has his own little movie industry, and is all in his own, like, he prints his own magazines and everything. It's real funny because, like, one of the biggest family, which is like the Yamaguchi Gumi, they run their own magazine, and in those magazines they make, like, you know, like respectable people out of themselves. You just print your own shit, and the movies too. They're always heroes. It's always like a Yakuza guy who, you know, helps this lady in trouble. Now they still kept that role because, like, when they had the big Nagoya, was it Nagoya or Osaka, when they had the big earthquake? Not that long ago. I think it was Kyoto. No, not Kyoto. One of those big cities had a big earthquake. The first guys to have an organized help in that whole situation was the Japanese gangster, was the Yakuza families who, like, were supplying water and everything. They're actually always sort of working on their image. There is nothing to compare with here in the Western world in that matter.
Now, the Yakuza, it's a tradition with them to have tattoos, is it not?
Yeah. They took that tradition from identification with those heroes. You know, they identify themselves to the heroes out of the Suikoden, and like that way they have a more respectable role because they take up a more like a Robin Hood type of role than the racketeering and.
Now they're the mafia of Japan, you would say.
Huh? Yeah. And as they say, you don't fuck with them. You know, they do had some crazy ass wars, and especially the wars among themselves, like one gang against the other gang, which is they used to have. There's very famous stories of, like, in the early 70s, what they call the Blue Castle incident in Osaka, where they used to do this war still in a traditional way, with the sword. You know, like somebody would come up and, you know, holding the big katana and screaming in Japanese, like something like, "Do me the honor of your dead," you know, and then, like, slice you into pieces. So, but now of course they have the guns, and a lot of it changed. I hear the power of the Yakuza is not as big anymore as it used to be, as well. Like, for years, you know, Japanese was. When it comes to small crime, a very, very safe country. No pickpocketing, no car radio theft, because the Yakuza kept all that stuff away. They never imported any heroin because, like, they did not want that small crime. Because small crime means, like, that the citizens are going to complain about it, and that means that the police apparatus is going to grow, and they had no use in a bigger police apparatus. So they always kept whatever they were doing on a certain level, which was prostitution, gambling, and they were apparently heavily involved in the stock market, and they still are. They are shareholders of all kinds of big companies. Whitewashing the same way. I mean, what they right now they're sort of like finding out that a lot of that whitewashing goes to the stock market in Europe. In Japan, that always went through the stock market.
Now, the Japanese tattoo is unlike the Western tattoo. Is the application of putting it on the body different than the way we do it with the little guns?
Yeah. And right now they start to work electric, but like they always worked, and they're still working with the hand tool. Now, basically, the hand tool you cannot make so much detail, but that also is not necessary because they actually apply only one tattoo, which is the back piece, and from the back piece the rest is all stuff to add to help it make it into a total piece. So, like, the big main drawing of the figure of a god or of a dragon is all, and the rest is just like little blossoms or cherry blossoms or peonies, and which helps to set the whole back piece. There is a couple of standard Japanese tattoos you won't see anymore either. They are just executed in a different way. Like a fireman always will have a water dragon. The guy who goes out to I got it. It's not just a Yakuza who tattoos. There is a couple of different groups of people, and they're more or less Gilds, like we used to have in Europe. So like a union type of thing. And in Tokyo, the firemen. Is that you?
Now, not only the underworld have tattoos in Japan, there's another group and other groups, aren't there?
Oh, there used to be a lot of... in the old days, they had all these guilds, like the wood carvers, the messengers, the paladin carriers. Like the picture we use on the poster is a messenger, and they used to, like some of them, like on the higher rank, you could actually read the ranks in the tattoo, which is also sort of the case with the gangster tattoos. But the gangster tattoos are mostly very recognizable because, like, the Oyaban, the father, the boss, will give this to his koban, to his children, and very often pay for it. So, like, there is always like a little scroll on the side of the tattoo which tells you that the boss paid for this, to decorate this thing. You know, it's like sort of like U.S. Marine Corps. You know, the boss decides what's going to happen with it and how it's going to look, and if it needs a wife, it will get a wife supplied and everything.
I noticed in the exhibit there was a very unusual jar with what appeared to be a finger in it. What's the story of that?
That's what it is. In fact, yesterday I saw in the newspaper that the Japanese sell little rubber fingers, because there's a lot of people there who have this little finger cut off. They call it yubikiri, which is the cutting of the finger. And this happens as an apologize. And now they actually are selling little plastic fingers to put on there, so because like the customs will immediately, European and American customers will always like jump upon it. They always feel that they recognize the gangster no matter how you lost your little finger. But it is a traditional way to apologize. If you need to have a real heavy apology, you like either cut your hair or tear out your fingernail or stuff like that. But the bigger one is when they cut it between the first and the second joint, and you cut it yourself, and you put this in a white silk handkerchief and present that to the boss, and if he puts it to his heart, everything is okay. If he refuses it, then you're going to get your throat cut at least. But the story goes that the chauffeur of the Dutch ambassador who wrecked the car in the 30s did the same thing. So like it's not just strictly a gangster thing. It's a sign of loyalty. There is a sign of loyalty to it as well. It's a strange world.
Hank, how long will your show remain here?
Oh, we are running this till around September. This is the whole year of that 400 years of celebration. So like we're running this until September, and it's been great. I mean, like I see people all of a sudden coming up in this place who've never been here before. Like a couple of shy Japanese businessmen with their little attaché cases, and they're like. And you see them, and then they're all sort of giggling. And then we had people go, "Oh, this will never happen in Japan." You know, like we know this exists in Japan, but like we never have a chance to like. So, Japan is changing though. We just did our first convention, and there's going to be another Japanese convention on 2 and 3 of September, and this is of course a big city thing. But it was a very interesting experience to be there again. Like it was the first time I was there in 1978, and we just did that little convention there, and it brought in young kids who were getting tattooed out of a fashion thing, next to, you know, like 4 or 5 guys all dressed up in their kimonos with their little fingers gone, and Japanese gangsters. It was great. We went out eating with a bunch of them. We had a fantastic time there. And yeah, it's good that it's opening up. I mean, like there is a lot of fantastic tattooing out there. A lot of fantastic tattooing. Thousands of people are tattooed without anybody really knowing. There is a fantastic collection of human skins in the university there. Apparently they have around 500 human skins who are all, you know, prepared. Some of them are still in jars with like formaldehyde. Other ones are like sewed up on dolls, and they don't throw all that stuff away.
I noticed actually when you were just speaking of the trades or the guilds that are in Japan, that in fact they don't seem to tattoo those areas that might be exposed to people.
They always tattooed sort of with these borders, so like you can put the kimono on without like other people knowing that you are tattooed, which was done here in Europe as well. In the pre-war days, people who were tattooed out of a sadomasochistic reason or whatever, like, you know, a very high ranking. I have a fantastic picture of this guy who was all tattooed up like this. Is not tattooed, and he's like, if he wears like a shirt, one of them wife beaters, and like his whole dick and everything, the whole area is heavily tattooed. And later on, there's this picture, and he holds a little stick like this, and he has his head on, and he is the South African police. You know, like, this son of a bitch, you don't want to be in a cell with that guy, you know, like he was a total pervert with all kind of like, so that stuff was done all over the place.
Still in the closet. Hank, thank you very much for being with us.
No problem. It was a pleasure.